welcome to Hell of a Picture, weekly movie podcast where we try to find out if a movie is, worthy of a hope, a hell of a picture claim. I am Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet as I do every week from my dear friend, Mr. David Hollandshurst. How are you this morning, sir?
Doing pretty good, man. Just a couple of guys hanging out in snapback ball caps, being real cool, and gonna talk about The Matrix. So excited.
The Matrix. Oh, man. So we are starting our transition from summer blockbusters. We sort of said this one was a bit of a summer blockbuster, but it actually came out more in spring, in March of '99. The Matrix, but it was still a huge blockbuster, and it kind of traveled over into the summer months. And we are kind of moving into movies that play with our sense of reality. And what better way to start than with The Matrix, which is kind of like the quintessential reality-based movie. Man, this movie is something else, and there has been a lot written on The Matrix. So I don't know how much more we're going to add here, but we have opinions on it and we have thoughts. And this movie is a movie that came out, 25 years ago, and it seems just as relevant today as it was back in the 90s. So Dave, do you want to, absolutely. So before we sort of get into a deep dive into The Matrix, we should do the rundown as we do.
We should do the rundown. Yeah, we should. It's important.
And we should let people, might be a while, but I feel like most people have seen the movie, but for those that haven't in a while.
Yeah, God, I hope you have seen The Matrix, because if not, you've been depriving yourself. But as a refresher, and just as a fun little exercise, The Matrix tells the story of Thomas A. Anderson, a man whose life is split in two. In one half, he is Thomas Anderson, a programmer for a respectable software company. In the other, he is a hacker who goes by the online alias Neo. By any name, our protagonist knows that something is wrong with the world. What he can't say, but he spends his nights scouring the darkest recesses of the internet, looking for answers, and a man named Morpheus. As it happens, Morpheus is also looking for Neo, and when they meet, Morpheus offers Neo a choice: the truth, from which he can never return, or the continuation of his bleak, cubicle-based existence. Neo chooses truth and hurtles down the rabbit hole into a terrifying future where humanity scrapes by on the brink of extinction, scurrying like vermin at the footfalls of the machines who have overthrown and enslaved the human race. Neo learns, to his horror, that human beings have been turned into a harvestable fuel cell designed to power the machine's continued dominance. What really makes the subjugation of humanity possible is the shared virtual reality called the Matrix, which simulates for the enthralled humans the world as it was in 1999, the peak of their civilization. And oh, how right they may have been. Yes, the world we know is a lie, a veil pulled over our eyes in order to keep us alive, pliant, and pumping out the juice. Furthermore, Morpheus reveals that Neo is the one, the reincarnation of an early denizen of the Matrix who could manipulate the program at will, and was the first to begin freeing minds from bondage. According to Morpheus, it is Neo's destiny to defeat the machines and wake humanity from its centuries-long slumber. And of course, the only way to do that is by learning a shit ton of kung fu, which he will need to fight the agents of the machines in some of the greatest hand-to-hand combat ever seen on screen. The Matrix was, of course, released in 1999. Very good year. It was written and directed by the Wachowski siblings. At the time, Andy and Larry, who would eventually transition to Lily and Lana. It stars Keanu Reeves as Neo/Mr. Anderson, Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus, Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity, and Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith. The film cost around $63 million and brought in what I'm sure was a surprising $467 million. Making it at the time the second highest grossing R-rated movie ever, just behind Our Boy Arnie and T2, where I think he played Bill Godspeed. Is that correct? I think that was that
That's
movie.
Right. That's right. Bill Godspeed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The Terminator was famously named Bill. It was nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Visual Effects, Best Sound Editing, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound. and it won all four for four at the Oscars. Pretty sweet. In 2012, the film was selected for preservation by into the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. It spawned 3 feature sequels: The Matrix Reloaded, The Matrix Revolutions, and most recently, The Matrix Resurrections. It also has an expanded universe of video games, short films, comic books, and general fan culture, which persists to this day. So certainly one of the early, I guess, one of the earliest sort of ideas to really spawn a universe, an expanded universe of other media. So an important and seminal work, The Matrix. And that is your rundown.
Well said, sir. I like that. That
Thank
was
you.
very, very in-depth and very thorough. And I want to make a quick note. Recently, Keanu Reeves was on The Late Show, and he got choked up talking about The Matrix. Stephen Colbert asked him.
Oh, Colbert. Okay.
Yeah, Colbert.
I don't know. Yeah. I always forget the various late shows and their hosts. So I just wanted that for
right. Late Show and
Colbert.
Tonight Show and whatever. So he was on Colbert, and he's quoted as saying he was asking about playing like the name game, like, okay, speed, like tell me your first thoughts when I say speed, when I say Point Break, when he's sort of playing the name game with Keanu, and he said The Matrix. And he sort of paused for a moment, and he almost got choked up. Well, he did get choked up. And he said, The Matrix changed my life. And then over these years, it's changed so many other people's lives in real positive and great ways. As an artist, you hope for that when you get to do a film or to tell a story. So when you say these years, the amount of people that I've met who have said to me and have been touched by The Matrix in a positive way, it's the best. So he obviously has like great reverence for the Matrix, and it's obviously been in the cultural zeitgeist since it came out. As we mentioned earlier, it's sort of as relevant today as it was 25 years ago when it came out, and it's so wild to think that it came out 25 years ago. Do you remember the first time when you saw this?
Yeah, I do. I didn't see it in the theaters, unfortunately, which is something that
neither did I.
I was a little regretful about at the time, but no, I was kicking it at our buddy Nigel Williams' house, and I think this movie was on like repeat for a day of just hanging out and watched it multiple times in succession. And that would not have been a rarity there afterwards. There's probably been a few days. I'm sure you and I probably watched this movie multiple times in a day before together. It's that kind of movie. It was huge for us, like absolutely huge. I remember there was actually a group Halloween costume. You and some other of our friends even went as the crew of the Neb, and that was a hoot. I mean, you were Neo, obviously. You weren't letting anyone else having that plum, that's for sure.
No,
who else can play
no
Neo?
Chance, man.
No one else in that group had the chops to play Neo. I think we can all agree.
Nobody can play Neo. It's me. I'm Neo. The first time I saw this, I was at shout out our other buddy Dave Newman's house, and we watched this in succession. This was a movie. This was probably one of the first movies that I ever finished watching, and we both were like just like mind blown, like almost like just stunned by how it blew us away. And we essentially, it was a VHS at the time, and it's like rewound the whole VHS and like started it right again. We were like, we have to. So we watched it. I remember like we watched the whole thing, and then we watched like half of it until I like had to go home or whatever, because it was just like, what? I have to like watch this again and be like, wait, what? Okay, so wait, when was the real world? What was happening? And it was such a weird thing to kind of think about and conceptualize, and wanting to watch it multiple times was important. So there's what do we want to start with, Dave, today when we're talking about whether this is a hell of a picture or not? There's a lot to break down with this movie.
There is a ton. Like you said, there's so much written on it. There's so much out there. The best we can really almost hope to do is just sort of parse through that for people, not so much really adding much more to it, because, there's university courses worth of information, just out there.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
a question certainly that I had, because, look, we've already been extolling the virtues of this thing, and we're not overstating anything to say that this movie changed cinema, and particularly the action genre, for sure, action and science fiction. And I've wondered how much of what was in here that, when we saw it, we were seeing it for the first time. But was this truly the first time that it was done? Or how much, originality was there in terms of the technical aspect of this, with the fight choreography, with the special effects, with bullet time? How much of that was originated here? How much of it was borrowed maybe from Asian cinema, so that North American audience just weren't familiar with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, like, what how much originality was there? How much was borrowed? What were the influences? What did you find out about
Well,
that?
I think like with a lot of films, obviously people have strong influences, right? And they bring a lot to the table. For the Wachowskis, what's interesting about them was, excuse me, this was their second feature film. They sort of wrote Assassins, this like 90s action thriller with Stallone.
Well, they were running a construction and house painting company in Chicago. Did you know? Which is super interesting. Like, that was like their first, like, they had like a little business, them, like just the two of them, a brother's business, and writing screenplays and painting houses. So awesome.
And somehow they were able to get it in the right hands and sell it. And with them selling it, they were able to get the sign on to write and direct 2 features. And so it was sort of this other feature, this neo-noir thriller called Bound, which they wrote and directed, and was critically, like, didn't make a ton of money, didn't do like amazing, but it was like critically, it was like, this is great. So they were like, okay, now you can go and make sort of The Matrix, which was the movie they really wanted to make. So they had a lot of influence from, like you said, like you mentioned, Asian cinema, kung fu cinema. They knew that, or kung fu movies. They wanted that to be a huge aspect of the production. But then conceptually, they came up with this idea of bullet time, and you mentioned it. It was this idea, this visual effect where they could shoot. Obviously it's different than slow mo. They're setting up kind of dozens of these cameras around a subject, and obviously we see this bunch in the movie, and it's kind of creating this like slow motion moving, which had never been done before. Like a lot of the basic martial arts stuff had come from, they brought in some fight choreographers from Asia, and they were doing a lot of the hand to hand stuff. Obviously, was I guess authentic but real, but versus this kind of these visual effects. And it was something that I know they pitched. They initially wanted Will Smith for the lead, they wanted him as Neo, and they pitched to him.
And I think Brad Pitt too, even before they got to Keanu.
Brad Pitt, and I think DiCaprio, and their choice right after Will Smith was Johnny Depp, and the studio was who wanted Keanu Reeves, and they pushed for Keanu Reeves.
Wow, the studio got it right.
But Will Smith turned it down because he couldn't get his head around bullet time, and he decided to do Wild Wild West, which is hilarious.
Great choice, Will. Yeah, I mean, I guess there was no opportunity for a sort of attached song for The Matrix. He wasn't going to be able to do a Will Smith like upbeat pop hip hop jam based around The Matrix. It just doesn't have that vibe. So maybe he did make the right choice. I don't know.
But there's this. So he couldn't wrap his head around bullet time, because they're trying to pitch to him, and they're saying, there's all these cameras, and it's going to circle you, and it's going to be in slow motion. You're going to do cool effects. And it's like, now it makes sense, kind of being us all knowing what the kind of bullet time is. But they were able to shoot at like 12,000 frames per second versus the normal 24 frames, which is what a film is. And it's like anybody that's seen sort of behind the scenes, these green screens and all these like dozens and dozens of cameras, and it was really, really wild what they were doing. They were really changing the game when it came to action and sci-fi. Story wise, it's not a story that we haven't seen before, but action sequence wise, and it carried on actually through the sequels, which critically were not as good, I would say, as the original, but even people quote or reference the highway scene from Matrix Reloaded as being like really one of the greatest action sequences ever.
I will defend parts of the Matrix Reloaded for sure.
Yeah,
I will definitely defend.
Yeah, people often just
still some incredible fight scenes in it.
Yeah, there's some incredible. They really got that stuff right, but then people often just reference the Zion orgy as what's to be remembered about the sequels.
Yeah, no, I mean there are some regrettable things in the sequels. I think the story sort of goes off the rails. They lose themselves a bit there. But yeah, never let it be said that they let us down on the fight front. They definitely still held themselves to a high bar there. And like I said, I will totally go to bat for part 2 in that regard. I also like too, on the subject of the fights and stuff like that. I did like, and I don't know how much either of us know about this, but there was this observable difference in the fighting styles between all the characters and things like that. Particularly when you saw Neo and Morpheus fight Agent Smith, and you saw the human style had this grace and creativity. There was artistry to it, and whereas the agent, it was a punishing, dominating style, relentless, and there was almost a cruelty to the way that Smith fought. And I just loved that juxtaposition. It was such a cool thing. And so much of this movie is about dueling ideas and dueling identities and things like that. And I just thought that was so dope. And continuing with style, and you talked about influences and what Borg Matrix about. There was a lot of anime in this. There was a lot of anime influence on this, and certainly in terms of the lighting and the aesthetics, the way the sets were designed, the way the characters dressed and things like that. Big time Akira influence, big time Ghost in the Machine. If anybody's into sort of really
Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell, but the Ghost in the Machine is another one as well, I think. Or no, I'm confusing the expression Ghost in the Machine, but you're right, Ghost in the Shell.
Yes.
But that whole motif, the cyberpunk kind of aesthetic, was heavily borrowed from that. One thing I did wonder though. So how everybody is dressed when they're on the Nebuchadnezzar, basically when they're not in the Matrix, the way everyone dresses when they're in the quote real world. It's that kind of post-apocalyptic, stylishly threadbare sweater. You know what I mean? It's like they're just coming from hockey practice. They've all got a little bit of holes in it. Have you noticed now that every movie that does anything sort of any kind of sci-fi, any kind of post-apocalyptic, they all wear that? I feel like the Matrix started that trend. It's you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, where are the colors? Come on, where are the bright colors? One must want a hint of color. Come on, unbelievable.
Oh,
the post-apocalyptic world is also pretty drab. It's pretty But
I guess unsurprisingly,
that's sort of what happens
when machines overthrow us. I will. Yeah, I mean, you're reduced to base levels of style.
Yeah,
feels like we're going that way.
When Morpheus is talking to Neo, kind of when he's like, do you want to know what the Matrix is? And it's like, you can't go back. This is this is what it is. Once you find this out, you're. And he sort of talks about in the early 21st century, everybody was raving about our invention of AI. And it's like, oh God, that's all I could think about was that's where we are right now, where it's happening right now. The Matrix is happening. We are in the Matrix, or it's we're just living it right now. And the Wachowskis are like essentially can see the future because they warned us. This is what's going down.
It was kind of funny in that scene, though. I remember that where like Morpheus says like the creation of AI, and Neo goes, "AI? You mean artificial intelligence?" And I was thinking like, yeah, I guess you would have to qualify that in that year. Like, you know what I mean? Like people just wouldn't have been talking about AI so fucking much that, you know, everyone knew right away. But it was just such a weird thing to hear now. It was just like, you mean artificial intelligence? Yeah, of course we mean artificial intelligence. Like what else could we mean? But yeah, different time. But yeah, I mean, I do love how they talk about 1999 as the peak of human civilization, and how I think we, especially as people who grew up in that decade, tend to think of it as like the last great era. You know, and I imagine everybody does.
They might be right
as they age. But yeah, but it feels maybe even possibly more apt in this way as we see our continued decline and think about just how sweet and innocent the 90s were. It was.
Well, exactly. And then you think about how it was with, you know, and it's just, AI, but then, you know, cell phones and just access to information and the internet and sort of, we were that last generation of like, you know, that being, I mean, we grew up with it, but it wasn't really introduced to us really until like we were in high school, right?
Yeah, it was sort of fed to us like gradually too. It wasn't like the way things are now. Like there's just like out of control acceleration all the time, and things seem to be happening at a more tempered pace then. And you know, like you think about it, 9/11 hadn't happened yet, so like the threat of global terrorism didn't loom over everything. We knew about climate change and environmental impact, but it didn't again sort of dominate, you know, our lives and conversations and stuff like that. There was just this. It was like this last sort of bit of repose before things just got out of control. And now it seems like we just haven't had a break for 20 years and you know, nor will we ever get one again. You know, it's just, this is just sort of what our life is now. And so maybe we are just nostalgic for our youth, but I think there is also something to be said for the 90s maybe being the last temporal safe space. You know, it's kind of an odd thing to think about and a scary thing to think about.
Well, speaking of scary things to think about, like, do you want to jump into the idea of reality in this? You know, because we're sort of talking about like, you know, thinking about the past, but like this idea of what reality is in this film, and I know you've done some readings on it, and I want to get into a conversation about like just the idea of what is real in this. And there's lots of, I mean, the whole movie is about this, but like, I want to throw to you about this idea of reality in the film. And this is something the film does really well and it's what kind of the whole movie is about and what people take from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It does talk a lot about what is real. And you know, one of the important questions it asks us is there any difference between a chemical electrical experience in your brain and that of tangible reality? You know, and what's the difference, I guess, if you can't tell the difference? There is an idea out there called the simulation theory that is not espoused just by crackpots, but also by legitimate scientists, mathematicians, philosophers. And basically, it postulates that it's actually more likely than not that we are all living in a simulation of some kind, like some kind of gigantic game of The Sims. And when a lot of people are confronted with this or some idea that threatens their construct of reality, they can turn nihilist, which is nihilism is a big theme in this movie as well, and we'll touch on that too. But sort of the response kind of is, well, if this isn't real, then nothing matters, which is sort of the nihilist philosophy. To which, you know, I think the reasonable counter is that, well, everything matters so long as the suffering that we experience is real. So long as pain and misery are possible, it behooves us all to do whatever we can to minimize suffering and maximize happiness. And that's just sort of like my kind of catch-all response to feeling nihilistic. And I just wondered, like, you know, if you found out you were living in a simulation, would you want to leave? Would you make the Cypher choice? What would you, if you had to choose between the Matrix and the desert of the real, as Morpheus describes it? as he was quoting actually from one of the books that inspired this movie, Simulation and Simulacra. Where would you side? Like, would you take the Cypher route, or would you tough it out and go the Neo road? Assuming you're Neo, you might just be Mouse or Link or so.
Link or Switch or
one of those guys.
That is such a good question, man. I haven't actually really thought about that. I think a movie like The Matrix, we obviously, as a collective, as storytellers, we gravitate towards a story that is based around somebody who's special, right? Like this is the story of Christ, the story of like the oldest story in our that we tell is about like a special person, and this person that is going to save us, or this person that's going to, not necessarily specifically only the Christ story, but like all stories like that.
Yeah, messianic stories permeate a lot of mythology. Yeah,
exactly. We think about that, and we're drawn to those stories because we like to think of ourselves as being special people, right? We're the lead in our own stories and our own lives. So to get back to your question of like, well, I always sort of, relate to what's the right answer. So like in the story of The Matrix, it's like he takes the red pill because he wants to know the truth. Truth is at the most is what is most important, versus like being deceived into a reality that doesn't exist. But I think it's a harder question, right? I think we'd like to think that we're all like Neos. We're all going to do the righteous thing and be the one, and like, and make the noble choice and sacrifice yourself. But like, we're probably more like Cyphers, and we're more like, okay, whatever. Like, this is what it is. Or it's like, if my choice is between eating fucking gruel for the rest of my life or like having an amazing steak but like, to me, it seems like it's an amazing steak. This is sort of the same idea that's brought up in Inception. I like that. I can think about when in Inception they have that scene where they're all they have like people go in their dreams, because it's like people are spending out half their lives in these dream worlds because it's better than what's happening in their reality. Yeah, so it's like, sure. I'd like to think that I'm a Neo, and I would be like, yeah, I want to be in the real world, and I'll deal with those consequences, but at least it's authentic and true.
But then the counter to that is too, like, define real, is the real world?
Yes.
Well, why is it more real? Because you can feel it and smell it and taste it. Well, you can also feel and smell and taste the Matrix, because it is, so why is that any less real? And what if, this sort of higher level of reality, what we would call like the real world, that could very well be a simulation of its own, and like, so it does sort of lead to this unending kind of like, like staring into, like, it's like when you're in an elevator, right? And you're looking at like just mirror, and, there's mirrors reflecting back on each other, you can just look forever and see continued reflections. And this kind of, you can enter into this, rabbit hole really of just, what is real and what constitutes real. And it can just go on interminably, so it's not as, it's a tough call. It's a tough call. And, you say is it the noble choice to do what Neo is doing? Well, it can certainly be framed that way, but you could also say that, there is, even though it's horrifying, there is a certain degree of symbiosis with the way that the machines and humans live in the Matrix sort of paradigm. Humans provide them with fuel, and the machines provide them with a better world than the one that they could be in. You know what I mean? Like, most people would be happier to live in the simulation of the Matrix than to have to exist in the future that is, that desert of the real, scorched earth, blackened sky, just scrounging for food. It's, it's obviously a terrible, terrible way to live. yeah. So the question, I guess, it's yeah, what is of greater value to you, and where what is the more noble path ultimately. It's sort of, I mean, there's a debate there too, about what is right and wrong.
So
And
so is there a danger then in the idea of this like noble act or this messiah character or this you know there is sort of a, a danger in that, and that's what I think makes this story so interesting, the story about the Matrix, because it's there is a it's not black and white, obviously, right? Like the
no,
idea of
certainly not.
being the Matrix and not being the Matrix is black and white, but it's littered with problems and problematic ideas about being in the real world versus the story about being in the Matrix. Um, like, well, yeah, red pill versus blue pill. If you're part of the Matrix, um, or you're willing to accept, like in this story, that's Cypher, and he's the enemy. He's the bad guy in the movie.
Yeah, as is
From
everybody
a
else who's just walking around in there, like
yes,
women, families and kids, and anybody who is not unplugged is the enemy. And it's a
right,
really great film device because that the agents can
right,
appear anywhere, but it's also a dangerous piece of if when people, some people have taken things from this, misappropriated things from this, and
mm,
that often happens with stuff. Over the years we've seen that with other messianic stories, like with Christian scripture or any religious scripture. People take it and they misinterpret it,
yeah,
or they use it to justify horrible things. And so you think about the idea that anybody who's not unplugged from the Matrix is the enemy, and the very people we are trying to save, we might have to kill. Like, I mean, what better kind of justification for a self-righteous asshole could you find, than something like that? It's the perfect kind of, bit of scripture for a terrorist or for a zealot or whatever. And I mean, yeah, we're talking about the danger in these stories. And when we talked about Interstellar, I mentioned to you how my experience had
mm-hmm.
changed because of shifts in culture and stuff like that. And The Matrix is another movie that has taken on some new meaning, a couple of new meanings actually. The first is, unfortunately, what we were just sort of touching on is the result of concepts being misappropriated by like conspiracy theorists. The red pill is a pretty common phrase that you'll see online and
Yes,
stuff like that. It's become synonymous with waking up to the truth, or the truth as certain people see it. Most
yeah,
typically, it's about like being inculcated into ideas like great replacement theory, flat Earth, QAnon, or whatever deranged shit people are peddling. And we prefaced, this by saying that we were, talking about movies that play with reality. And
yes,
this is kind of disturbing and fascinating, because here we see that movies can not only play with reality in the context of the film, but they can also, kind of extend broader, and they can have societal change on reality.
yeah,
And, people use these things as a kind of mythos or scripture to shape their worldview and craft shared delusions. And it's this insane meta extension of the themes of the movie. I don't want to rail against this like as long as I did with Interstellar, but it just know that it makes me equally as angry. You know, because these people have no
but does it
idea what
make
they're
you
talking about.
angry? Does it make
Well,
you
I just
angry because appropriating like a film like The Matrix with like messaging that really sort of is counter to maybe the intention of the artists, in this case the Wachowski siblings, like, do you feel like that's where your anger comes from, or is the anger because you just think that these ideas are I guess are wrong or just not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. I think you're right in both senses. Like, yes,
Okay,
I don't like that they've corrupted, something that I really loved, a movie that holds a special place in both hearts, and that they've totally misinterpreted. Because, like, yeah, like if you think that
right,
the Trudeau liberals are the machines and you're Neo, you have grossly misinterpreted the film. Like it's like how anti-vax people, would keep invoking 1984 during COVID. Like I don't think they read or understood that book. But this is the problem. Like you were saying,
Right.
everyone sees themselves as a messiah of sorts, particularly nowadays. I think, sort of self-aggrandizement and like cult of personalities, our own little cult of personality is a very common thing. And
Yes.
anyone can convince themselves that they're rebelling against something unreasonable. And it's these kind of stories used to appeal to me, and like you say, they're very common, but now I kind of find them upsetting because of how easily they're misused. And it's tragic, that we have to sort of consider that now when we're making these stories. Am I overreacting to this? Did you find that the whole like red pill thing, the way it is now, did that affect your watch through at all?
It's tough to, it's, it's, it's hard when you have such, such a love for something, and then it gets, I don't know, appropriated by groups of people to kind of mean something that it really didn't have its intention and meaning. But I guess that's with any art, right? Like you can
Mm-hmm.
have art, and I can look at it one way and you can look at it another way, and that's the sort of beauty of art. I strongly feel, and especially from the readings that I've done, is like this isn't a movie about sort of waking up to the reality and what like conspiracy theories and like people are controlling us. The movie is really just about actually about identity, and especially with the filmmakers, and they've both been on record saying this. The Wachowskis were born male and they transition, and now they're both women. They're trans women, and you know the idea, even down to the red pill is like an estrogen pill, right? Like
Oh,
these
really? I didn't know that.
ideas. Yeah, that's sort of like an idea in the film, but like really like the ideas of your reality and what you're are presented with in our world, like, and how you present yourself and how you are is really a driving theme, I think, from the filmmakers and what they
Oh, big
intended,
time.
because it was like they were both obviously living as um you know uh identities which they were not felt. I
Yeah,
guess
they weren't at home in their own bodies, so to speak. Like they
exactly.
yeah, their mind and body, or their
So it's
soul
like
and
the
body, were sort of were of two worlds.
right, and like that seems to be more in line with what the movie is presenting, versus an idea that governments and higher powers are controlling you to, you know, women are controlling you, and you're not a real man, unless you take a
Yeah,
red pill, and like
and learn kung fu and
ridiculous
shoot a bunch of
ideas like
people.
that.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're
Yeah.
100%
So
right. Like, I mean,
yeah.
sorry, continue.
No, I mean it. Like I said, I just think it's a hard thing to accept sometimes, that when people sort of misinterpret an idea for their own sort of agenda,
Hmm.
that can be difficult, right? And I feel like maybe the Wachowskis probably feel the same way, right? They
Do you
don't.
think
I
there's
don't think they
some? Do you think there's
necessarily.
some responsibility incumbent on an artist to recognize that going in, like particularly now, where we see the way things are co-opted, like the Matrix. We see the way that ideas can really sort of, propagate and become dangerous things. Like, do you think there's some
Yeah.
responsibility of an artist going in? Like, should you know what you're creating and consider the consequences, or is it, no, like I'm just going to do this and what happens happens?
That's a really tough question, because it's like I don't think it's on an artist to decide how their work should be interpreted. I don't think they should consider, oh, maybe this might be co-opted in a way that I'm not intended, because it's like, I feel like that can be with anything, right? Like, and you can take any sort of piece of art or work and, and say, okay, this is my intention, but like, that really doesn't matter. It's all in sort of how people receive it. This isn't new to filmmaking. It certainly isn't new to like art in general and music. And it's like, people have been blaming, various pieces of art or various like forms of entertainment or whatever. And like thinking video games and music and being like, okay, and like books and whatever. It's like, these are all things that are people kind of take and they give their own sort of interpretation of them. And I find you start blurring the lines a bit when you start saying, okay, now it's on the artist to decide or to consider like how people will interpret it, because it's like, I don't think that's really the job of an artist. I don't think it's the job to decide how or be concerned with how their work is going to be interpreted. But it's hard. It's hard.
It is hard. It is. And I see your position. Like, I totally understand that, because when you start, you can become fettered. You can shackle yourself and your expression as an artist when you start doing that. I don't know. I think it's sort of, I think it should be incumbent upon, a creator to at least consider it as part of their creative process, if nothing else, to think about how it could be viewed and interpreted and maybe misappropriated. But you're right to the, things, people will find justification where they want it, and they will take things from art and from whatever that you just can't predict. Like, I mean, Charles Manson, Helter Skelter supposedly like inspired him, in his atrocities. That song's about a carnival ride. A Helter Skelter is a carnival ride. That, it's a name for one that they have for it in England. Like, it is not about anything. It's not about anything to do with what Manson thought it was. But when you think about sort of mass killing culture, and that's kind of a weird phrase to say, but shockingly, it is actually a culture in our world. It just feels like the stakes have been raised, and I don't know, maybe there is a certain responsibility to try to understand it, particularly when you're telling stories of this nature. When you're telling stories of this nature that are anti-authoritarian, they are messianic, there's an inherent danger in them greater than other things, I think. And it's kind of like, it's the Kurt Vonnegut conundrum. He wrote a book called Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a war book. And he took him a long time to get around to writing it, because his deepest concern was, how can I write this in a way that doesn't make war look cool and still be a good book? And if you think about every war movie you've ever seen, even ones that show the horror of war, there's still something in there. Like there's honor, or there's heroics, there's bravery of some kind. There is atrocity and all this stuff. But like, it's so hard to make something good about anything and not have that thing be vaguely sympathetic. You know what I mean? Like even war, when you're showing the tragedy of it, there's still something in there that people will take as like, oh, this is cool, and totally misinterpret what you're doing. Like, I think about the Joker and Taxi Driver, in that way, and just how like these characters are not good people, but they do become sympathetic over the course of the movie, and that's kind of a dangerous thing. And you can see how people might use that inspirationally to their own ends, and it's something that I think we should at least be talking about. Like I said, I don't want to shackle the artist, but I do think it's something that, particularly nowadays, is things we need to consider. We talked about it. How this this movie changed. You were talking about how it's more about identity than being a rebuke of governments or anything like that. And I think you're absolutely correct. Like, when they go into the Matrix, you see how their self-image is projected versus how they were previously. And there's a lot in there about, how we are viewed versus how we view ourselves. and how much more poignant that is, knowing that what the film, who the filmmakers are now. That was, that was a real sort of shift in the picture and our interpretation of it.
There's an interesting idea that there was a theme or that I guess the idea of like the transgender theme in the film. I mean, the Wachowskis have come out and said that, the I guess the movie studios, as well as just like society in general, we're not ready for like the idea of a trans theme in a picture like this, kind of like how it was presented. There's a quote here from Lily Wachowski in 2020, and it was about the Matrix was intended as an allegory for gender transition, and said the corporate world wasn't ready. She said it was all about the desire for transformation, but it was all coming from a closeted point of view, which makes total sense for the film.
Yeah.
And that really, even Keanu Reeves didn't realize that the film was an allegory for transgender identity when they filmed it. The character, even the character of, I think in the initial script, the character of Switch. So, she was one of the kind of the which one I was talking about. Originally, that was
one of the crew of the Neb. She wears the white.
One of the crew
when they went. Yeah.
So initially, she was actually when they're in the Matrix was supposed to be, I think, a female, and then when they're on the Nebuchadnezzar in the real world, she was supposed to be male, or like vice versa, I think. So, but they were just like, okay, this is just not gonna work, because they wouldn't.
Wow, that got nipped by the execs.
I think, or it's just like, whatever it however it got. I think in the initial script or something, it just was maybe a bit convoluted, or was like confusing, or however it was. But yeah, that idea, I think, is such an interesting one, and I think I think that is hopefully sort of one of the lasting ideas around the film, and that's why it still is sort of in the cultural zeitgeist, because it sort of really brings the those ideas to a head. But it's also important, I think, to know who created it, right? And with the Wachowskis, that's sort of the you can make that case because of what they went through, and sort of
it's coming from a place of personal experience. Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's often done, and we've talked about this before on the show, how ideas get packaged up in a certain way in order to commodify them, and they're almost sort of hidden. Like we talked about in Little Women, like there was that quote about how Shakespeare hid his ideas into popular, into popular plays, and that's how he was able to get them out there, and that's sort of a similar thing here too. Like, you take these ideas, like gender identity. This movie is a huge rejection, I think, of, it's not so much a rejection of authoritarian government, though it is that, but I think the system that the Matrix is metaphorical for is more sort of one of consumerism, one of sort of economic and social kind of constraints, rather than maybe kind of like, true bondage or true, like, sort of an identifiable government. I think it's more about systems. But yeah, you take all that and, you package it up into a Kung Fu movie. Perfect. This is the way to get your message to the people. Like, it's because if you just sort of made, a film, I guess, that confronted those things more directly, it becomes a drier, less palatable kind of experience for a lot of people. But now it's, a $500 million movie that spawns multiple sequels and a whole universe. And it's, Yeah, it's interesting too that the time that this came out. I just want to touch on this briefly, but like 1999, you had movies like Fight Club coming out, and American Beauty, and The
Yeah.
Matrix, and the idea of nihilism comes up early in this book. Very early on, Neo is in his apartment and he's selling like this, like, I don't know, pirated material or malware or something like that. He's kind of like a software drug dealer. It sort of seems like, there's that guy comes to his door,
Yeah.
he's buying something, and so Neo goes to his stash, and it's this book, Simulation and Simulacra. And he opens it up, and he's got his stash in there. And the section that he opens to is on nihilism. And so there's this nihilistic idea sort of permeate the whole film. And that was really in the zeitgeist. Like, I mean, probably seen nowhere greater than in Fight Club. I mean, Fight Club is the story of the disenchanted, sort of dude in society. Now, the nihilistic, young man who doesn't think anything matters, and he's sort of trapped in this prison of consumerism and stuff like that. And one of the philosopher that really gets associated most with nihilism is Friedrich Nietzsche. And one of the things that he said, and it's pretty shocking how sort of true it is, he sort of predicted that nihilism would kind of erode our society eventually. People would sort of, they would realize, they would come to the realization that nothing mattered. And so they would start to lose faith in institutions, in morals, in any kind of religious or governmental organization. And that is kind of happening in a way. Like, it's not just that it's not now that we don't believe in anything. It's almost that people are capable of believing in everything. But that erosion of faith is totally happening. Like, people don't trust facts anymore. People don't have any kind of faith in popular media or things like that. And so it is like this weird sort of fruition of his prognostication in a way. Like, nihilism is sort of eroding us, but the problem is people don't believe in nothing. They will believe in anything. And it's just an interesting bit of commentary that the film has that I kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole yesterday. You saw my notes. It was a little excessive. So we won't get all the way into that, but one thing I do want to point out about that book, though, one last thing on the book. So when Neo opens it, he opens to the section on nihilism, and so nihilism that is on this side of the book, and on the other side of the book there is like an inch deep cutout of where he hides his stash.
Sure,
that is actually a physical impossibility with that book, because the section on nihilism is the last section of the book, and it's pretty short. So I don't know if this is like a further comment by the filmmakers to say, like, reality is malleable. I don't know, or something, like, I mean, like, it's just sort of another sort of thing, like, or if they just really wanted to have that, overt reference to nihilism there, and also use this thing as his stash. I don't know if that's something or nothing, but I thought it was interesting.
It's I think from the filmmaker's point of view, I think it's obviously a choice that I don't think it was like story based. Like, I think but it works within the story, right? You're like, oh, this is actually not how the book is actually read, or how the book, this wouldn't actually work. So like, maybe for Neo, it's like he has this book, but it's not the actual real book. It's like this, but
it's like a simulacrum, which is sort of what the book talks about.
That's, I actually noticed that too. I was like, oh, nihilism, interesting. Like, it's very purposeful, right? Obviously.
Totally.
In that moment. But there's the film, color palette in the film, the acting, the writing, the kung fu, or the fight sequences, the action sequences. These are all things that the film does really well. I brought up the color palette because it's just like this sci-fi, like we had mentioned it earlier, the drab of the real world, like the grunginess of the real world. And then there's this green tint for the other stuff, the set design. Yeah. The film does all this stuff really well and gives it an authenticity. It really holds true, I think, to today. But there are things that the film sort of does that don't necessarily hold up, that doesn't necessarily hold up. There's, I don't know about you, the as well as the bullet time stuff looks, and it still looks good. I think it looks amazing. Like,
absolutely, still love it.
The lobby fight scene, the dojo fight scene. The last moment where he sort of he becomes the Messiah, essentially becomes the one. And he runs and dives into Agent Smith.
Yeah.
And just like,
and there's like the little sort of
essentially
like, you
makes him
know, bulges
explode.
on him. Yeah.
I don't know if that felt like it really, aged well with respect
I
to the
remember even
FX.
thinking at the time
It's
that
just
that
like
didn't look the
looks,
best. Even then,
yeah,
I was
it was
just like,
sort of like what?
it's not their best work. Yeah, there was two bad pieces of FX in the whole movie. I thought it was that one, and then when Trinity at
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning of the chase scene, she does like that, like sort of like corkscrew, like twisting, like sort of like dive through the window.
Right.
Both of those looked a
Yeah.
little out of place with in the movie, and just didn't sort of meet the standard of the rest of the film. I thought in terms of FX quality, but pretty
Yeah.
minor grievance.
Anything else for you that didn't quite work?
There's stuff. I mean, like, we've seen this movie like dozens of times now.
Nitpicks.
So after, yeah, I mean, after so many
Yeah.
times, you're gonna find little things. I do find, like Neo's deja vu experience. That is not how I understand deja vu to exist.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like with the cat, because I've
Correct.
never had that experience. Like when I have deja vu, it's like you and I are having a conversation. I'm just like, oh man, did we talk about this? Or like, sometimes I'll have dreams where mundane things happen, and then that thing will sort of happen, and I
Yes.
have deja vu in that way.
Yes.
But to actually see, a repeat, a visual repeat of a thing in that kind of way that he experiences it, I would go see a neurologist. Like I would be very concerned if that happened. So yeah, that's kind of weird, but I appreciate it as part of the world building though, because it does sort of, and they needed it, right?
So to counter that, I would say, how do you depict deja vu in a film? Like you couldn't, because a lot of times you're watching movies and there's callbacks to earlier in the movie, and it's like, oh, there's this like reference to this thing earlier, and you're sort of like, it with editing, it's so hard to do, to be like, you can't really have a scene of him seeing a cat and then like later him being like, oh, I think I saw that cat before. It like in the context of the film, you could do that, but it's like you necessarily wouldn't remember that earlier shot, right? So it's like they need to make it very abundantly clear that this is deja vu. And so like, what is deja vu? It's like having an event happen twice. So it's like, you need to hammer it home for the audience. So it's like, I kind of get why they did it the way they did it. Cause like I said, I don't experience deja vu like that.
No,
I experienced it like exactly how you did. Where you're like,
yeah,
wait, wasn't I here before? This feels like familiar. You have that, but it was a cool concept, right? Cause you're sort of in a movie based around reality. Like,
yeah,
not that specific, but like, talking about deja vu and being like deja vu, and you're like, oh shit, like I've had deja vu before. Like
I'm in the Matrix. Yep,
this
I'm
is
in
a
the Matrix.
Glitch in the Matrix. Yeah,
I guess the alternative is just not doing it that way. I guess like the like you're right. This is sort of the only way they could do that.
Right.
I guess the other choice is to just not do it, which I don't think the movie would suffer for if they didn't do it. But I do like those little, because like in the Matrix Reloaded too, they talk about how any sort of experience you've heard about of someone seeing a ghost or a vampire or a werewolf or aliens, it's actually all sort of like Matrixy thing. There's some Matrix shenanigans going on, and again, like sort of little bits of world building like that, I do find to be effective and interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I know, I agree completely. I guess, is there anything else from you that you feel is like nitpicky or that doesn't quite work?
I mean, the whole humans are a virus speech that Smith gives Morpheus is kind of flawed. He says, like, you're not mammals because every mammal naturally finds an equilibrium in their environment. And that's not entirely true. If you took like a koala bear and put it in, the forest in Newfoundland, it would upset the balance. That's what an invasive species is. So I don't, it's pithy. I get why he does, like, it in the first few times you see it, it's like, oh yeah, oh damn it, we are a virus. But, it doesn't hold up to ecological scrutiny, I will say.
I think the thing that this movie does really well, which you could be nitpicky about it, but it's like how it sets it, how it, and we both mentioned this off the hop, was like people could be dismissive or it's like the movie's confusing, or like the movie makes me have to watch it again to really understand it. But that's what I think is a really endearing quality about the movie. And that like you watch it, you know, when you rewatch it, you really get something new every time you rewatch a film. You're like, oh yeah, that's really cool, or this is really cool, or sort of just like you know, getting a sense of like the conversations that characters have and what they mean, and you just sort of get like, you pick up on small things, and it's like, I love when a film does that, and we talk about that a lot on Hell of a Picture, where you like when film has a rewatchability and you can get something new from it every time you watch it, then I think that's recipe for success. And that's what this movie does. Like we both, like I said, the first time I ever watched this, I was like, we're starting it right again. I need to watch this movie again. And that doesn't happen a whole lot with movies, which is pretty great.
For sure.
So before we get in, well, actually, no, we've just hit the hour mark, man.
We've been talking.
Trucking along. We've been talking. So let's get into the climax here of our show. And I'm interested to hear for you. You have lots of thoughts on this movie, but does this movie for you? Will you take the red pill or the blue pill? And will you take the red pill and make a hell of a picture, or will you take the blue pill and stay in the real world and pretend this is not stay in the Matrix and pretend this isn't a hell of a picture? I'm curious.
Thank you for detailing which option was which there, because I wasn't gonna, like, if you just said red and blue, I was like, so which is yes and which is no? I don't quite understand. I can't track the metaphor there.
I had to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good that you do. I'll be brief here. This is a hell of a picture. I love this movie. I've always loved it. It gets better with age, I think. It's incredibly relevant. It's incredibly seminal. It influenced not just action and science fiction cinema, but I would say all. And culturally, huge impact. It's a joy to watch too. And that's the thing. Like you were talking about, like, you know, you like it when movies require you to watch them again in order to extract things and in order to get your head around concepts and stuff like that. And that is great, so long as the movie itself is not a slog. And this movie is not a slog. It is not a chore to watch this movie. You could take absolutely nothing from this movie thematically or philosophically and still enjoy this movie, because it's just awesome. The fight scenes are still so great. I love the characters. I like the world building that goes on. I like that Agent Smith's cronies, the two agents with him, are both Conan O'Brien. That gives me joy every time I see them. I'm just like, hey, the two Conans, right on. I love it. Hell of a picture, undoubtedly. Give me the red pill.
I'm going to join you down the rabbit hole. I'm taking the red pill, 100%. This is
because you're Neo.
Without a
you're
doubt.
Neo. We've established this.
Obviously, I'm the star of my own reality. This is such a good movie, man. And this was one of my favorite movies for a long time when I first saw it. And every time I watch it every couple of years. I'll revisit it, and man, every time I watch it, I'm like, this movie holds up and is so good, and the action sequences are so good, and the story is so good. I have very little, if any, kind of qualms with it. I sort of mentioned my nitpick stuff, but it's nothing to drive me into staying in the Matrix and taking the blue pill. I'm taking the red pill all the time. And this movie is amazing. It is
still on my short list of best movies ever, I would say. Like if I were to compile I think I don't know, I'll say tentatively, like if I had to make a top 25, I think I'd have a hard time excluding this film. It's and it might be highly placed in that top 25. This could be a top 10er for me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
It's high praise. So, as our boy Nick Cage would say.
It's high praise. It is high praise.
I watched Con Air last night, just for fun.
Yeah, just for everybody, Con Air was on our potential summer blockbusters. We decided we only could do one Nick Cage this time around. But maybe we'll do Con Air. Man, Con Air.
I think we have to, if for no other reason than to talk about Nick Cage's hair and his Southern accent, which was totally unnecessary and just brutal. It was insane. Oh man, like the Nick Cage voice becomes so much better when he's putting on like this just accent that he is not equipped to handle. It's wonderful. Just a joy.
It's like Costner in Prince of Thieves.
It's so amazing that you mentioned that, because that's what Sam said last night too. But I was like, well, the only difference is that, at least Cage is consistent in using the accent. With Costner, there are times in Prince of Thieves where he just abandons it entirely, like just gives up on the pretense that he's an Englishman, and it's so great. I love that movie, by the way. I will talk Prince of Thieves with you all day. I friggin' love.
Definitely want to talk about Prince of Thieves at some point.
I defend it to
there's
my death.
Also there's. I'm also, as we mentioned last week, talking about 2 weeks ago when we were talking about The Rock, and we were I was sort of talking about the analogy, or the not analogy, the theory that Mason is actually James Bond,
right?
There's these sort of fan theories. There's another fan theory with Con Air, where the Steve Buscemi serial killer is actually Donnie from The Big Lebowski.
He snapped. He just went over the head.
Yeah, so that's a fun theory. We can get into that when we talk about Con Air. The Matrix. It's great. This was more of a heavier episode, considering the majority of our prior episodes we were doing impersonations of Nick Cage and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and quoting Will Smith lines from Independence Day. But this is kind of a heavier movie.
It sort of had to be
in some regards. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we could do this episode and give credence to the film if we didn't talk about that stuff, because it's so important. Like this movie is as much a philosophical treatise as it is a kung fu fighting thrill ride. But it is both those things, and it's a perfect union of the two, I would say.
And that's a nice segue into what we'll be talking about next week, which, to continue down this rabbit hole, so to speak, of reality and reality-based movies, sci-fi movies that are sort of, is it real? Is it not? Where are we to? What are we doing? David, I'll throw to you as to what reality-based movie we're hopping into next week.
Yes, well, you did mention that there was a sort of a dearth of Arnie impressions in this episode, and never fear, we're gonna make up for it next week, because we are doing 1990 Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Total Recall. You got Arnie, you got Paul Verhoeven, your boy of RoboCop and Starship Troopers fame. This thing is going to be replete with Arnie impressions. There's some great lines in this, and it's also just a really interesting movie. Verhoeven is another guy who can take great ideas, explore them in an intelligent way, and package it up in a very commercially viable kind of way. You saw that with RoboCop for sure, and you see it as well in Total Recall. And very much a is it real, is it not kind of experience. And one of my might be my favorite Arnie movie. I don't know. I'm up for having that discussion.
Oh man, it's been a long time since I've seen Total Recall. I mean, I haven't revisited that in 20 years. At least.
This will be fun then.
This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. So we're going to get into Total Recall next week, and we've done The Matrix and reality-based movies one for one so far. And let's see if Total Recall can get the hope next week. We shall see. So for David Hollinshurst, I'm Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another episode of Hell of a Picture.
Or has it?